The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grissom. What happens when the color of your skin dictates your freedom, but the beating of your heart belongs entirely to those in chains? In the antebellum American South, a 7-year-old Irish orphan named Lavinia steps off a ship and onto the soil of a Virginia tobacco plantation. She has no memory of her past, no family left alive, and no status. Placed in the plantation's kitchen house to work alongside enslaved people, she is wrapped in the only genuine love she has ever known. But as Lavinia grows, the brutal realities of a racially divided world force her to cross the threshold into the big house, a transition that ignites a devastating chain of secrets, betrayal, and systemic violence that will threaten the survival of everyone she holds dear. Part 1. The Kitchen House and the Bond of Survival, 1791 to 1796. The story opens in 1791. 7-year-old Lavinia McCartan arrives at Tall Oaks, a sprawling Virginia tobacco plantation owned by Captain James Pike. Lavinia's parents died during the brutal transatlantic voyage from Ireland. To pay off the family's passage debts, Lavinia and her brother are bound into indentured servitude. Her brother is sold away immediately to a blacksmith, later dying from the harsh conditions, while the traumatized, amnesiac Lavinia is brought to Tall Oaks. Because she is an indentured servant, Captain Pike does not place her in the main mansion, the big house, but sends her to the kitchen house, the detached structure where the household slaves live and labor. There, she is placed under the care of Belle, the captain's fiercely independent, 18-year-old illegitimate daughter. Belle was born to an enslaved woman the captain loved, and though raised with some privileges by the captain's mother, she was banished to the kitchen house once the captain brought home his fragile new white bride, Martha Blake. The kitchen house is anchored by Mama May and Papa George, the deeply loving matriarch and patriarch of the plantation's domestic slaves. Alongside their children Ben and the twins Beatty and Fanny, they nurse the sickly Lavinia back to health. Despite the color of her skin, Lavinia is absorbed into their family unit. She learns to cook, clean, and share in their joys and daily hardships. To Lavinia, Mama May is her mother, Belle is her older sister, and the kitchen house is the only home she knows. However, Lavinia's white skin creates an ongoing anomaly. She is an outsider to the white aristocracy, yet she possesses a legal racial privilege that the enslaved family nursing her can never claim. As she grows into a young girl, she remains blissfully but dangerously naive to the cruel hierarchy governing the world outside the kitchen walls.
Part 2. The Darkness of the Big House. As the years progress, the underlying rot of Tall Oaks begins to seep into Lavinia's world. Inside the big house, the captain is frequently away on business, leaving his wife, Martha, isolated and increasingly depressed. Martha struggles to cope with the brutal isolation of plantation life and turns to laudanum, an opium derivative, eventually falling into a severe, paralyzing addiction. The couple's son, Marshall Pike, grows up under highly toxic conditions. As a child, Marshall is subjected to horrific sexual abuse by a cruel live-in tutor. Discovering this, Ben, Mama May's son, kills the tutor to protect the boy, and the enslaved community binds together to cover up the murder. Despite this protection, the trauma severely warps Marshall's psyche. He grows into a deeply troubled, volatile, and deeply resentful young man, projecting his self-hatred and trauma onto the enslaved people around him. Lavinia's life shifts dramatically when tragedy strikes the big house. The Pike's young daughter dies in a freak accident, causing Martha to spiral completely into drug-induced madness. During this chaos, Martha gives birth to a second son, Campbell. With Martha incapacitated, Lavinia is brought into the big house to serve as the infant's primary caregiver. Over time, Martha grows attached to Lavinia, viewing her as a companion, and begins educating her to be a proper white Southern lady. Lavinia finds herself straddling two worlds. She is dressed in fine clothes and taught high society manners in the big house, but her heart, loyalty, and true sense of family remain firmly rooted in the kitchen house below. Part 3. Separation and the Illusion of Belonging. Following the sudden death of Captain James Pike, the plantation's fragile stability shatters. Martha's sister and her lawyer husband, Mr. Madden, arrive from Williamsburg to take the addicted Martha away for medical treatment. Because Lavinia is a white teenager who deserves a proper station in life, the Maddens insist on taking her with them to Williamsburg to complete her education. Lavinia is heartbroken to leave her true family at Tall Oaks, particularly Belle, who has recently given birth to a son named Jamie. Lavinia secretly suspects that Will Stevens, a kind-hearted neighbor and the plantation's new overseer, is Jamie's father, leading her to reject Will's own romantic advances out of a misplaced sense of betrayal. In Williamsburg, Lavinia blooms into a beautiful young woman, socialized into the elite white world. Yet, she remains profoundly homesick. When a grown-up Marshall Pike visits Williamsburg, he courts Lavinia. Desperate to return to the only place she ever considered home, and completely blind to Marshall's deeply violent and abusive nature, Lavinia accepts his marriage proposal. She returns to Tall Oaks not as a servant, but as the new mistress of the big house. Part 4, The Tragic Return, 1801 to 1810. Lavinia's return to Tall Oaks is far from the joyous homecoming she envisioned. The dynamic has irrevocably shifted. She is now the oppressor by title, and her old family in the kitchen house must treat her with the distant deference demanded by slavery. Furthermore, Lavinia quickly discovers the horrifying truth about her new husband. Marshall is a violent, abusive alcoholic who inflicts absolute terror on the plantation. Lavinia learns to her horror that Marshall had been brutally raping Belle for years, and that Belle's son, Jamie, is actually Marshall's own son and half-brother, not Will Stevens' child. Marshall treats Belle with immense cruelty to hide his shame and control her. Lavinia soon gives birth to a daughter, Eleanor, Ellie. Trapped in an abusive marriage and realization of her own helplessness, Lavinia, too, falls into the trap of laudanum addiction, mirroring the path of the late Martha. While Lavinia is incapacitated by the drug, Marshall's tyranny goes unchecked. He forces Belle's son, Jamie, into hard field labor and openly abuses the staff. He also begins a sexual relationship with the slave twin Beatty, fathering more children. Climax, blood and retribution. The breaking point arrives in 1810 when Marshall's debts accumulate from gambling and drinking. To cover his financial losses, Marshall decides to sell several of the plantation's core slaves, including Mama May, young Jamie, and Fanny's husband, Eddie. This devastating news snaps Lavinia out of her drug-induced stupor. Horrified that her complacency has endangered the family that raised her, she joins forces with the enslaved community to orchestrate an escape plan via the Underground Railroad. The escape attempt turns catastrophic. Marshall discovers the plot and intercepts the runaway slaves. In the ensuing violent confrontation, Marshall savagely beats his own illegitimate son, Jamie, and attacks Belle. Driven by decades of suppressed trauma, systemic torment, and the immediate need to protect his family, Ben steps forward and kills Marshall Pike. Knowing that a black man killing a white plantation owner means horrific public execution for Ben and retaliation against the entire community, Lavinia makes a monumental choice. She uses her white privilege as a shield, covering herself in blood and confessing to the arriving authorities that she was the one who killed her abusive husband in self-defense. Resolution, a costly freedom. Lavinia is arrested and imprisoned, facing a high-profile trial. However, because of her status as a white lady and the legal assistance of Mr. Madden, who knows the extent of Marshall's historical abuses, she is ultimately acquitted of the charges. Though free, the toll of the tragedy is immense. Tall Oaks is dismantled. To secure the safety of the enslaved family, arrangements are made to send Belle, Jamie, Mama May, and the others north toward true freedom. In the poignant final chapters, Lavinia, scarred but finally clear-eyed about the horrific nature of the society she lives in, uses the remaining resources to purchase a small, independent farm on the outskirts of Tall Oaks. Joined by those who survived the ordeal, she chooses to live a quiet life, finally free of the big house, forever bound by blood, love, and sacrifice to the family born of the kitchen house. Core themes for reflection. The illusion of whiteness. The novel brilliantly dissects how race operates as a construct of power. Lavinia's white skin grants her legal immunity and socioeconomic elevation, yet it isolates her from the genuine human warmth of the black family that raised her, throwing her into the hollow, abusive world of white supremacy. The universal subjugation of women, Grissom draws stark parallels between the enslaved women and the white mistresses. While the black women suffer the ultimate horrors of slavery, rape, and forced separation from their children, white women like Martha and Lavinia are also treated as property, trapped in abusive marriages, turning to substance abuse to numb their lack of agency. Family defined by love, not blood, the emotional core of the narrative is that true family is forged in the trenches of shared suffering, empathy, and mutual care, transcending the rigid racial boundaries enforced by an unjust world.